Matteo Bandello was an Italian writer, mostly known for his novellas. Biography. Matteo Bandello was born at Castelnuovo Scrivia, near Tortona, c. 1480. He received a good education, and entered the church, but does not seem to have been very interested in theology. For many years he lived at Mantua and Castel Goffredo, and superintended the education of the celebrated Lucrezia Gonzaga, in whose honor he composed a long poem, The Decisive Battle of Pavia, as a result of which Lombardy was taken by the emperor, compelled Bandello to flee. His house at Milan was burnt and his property confiscated. He took refuge with Cesare Fregazzo, an Italian general in the French service, whom he accompanied into France. He was later raised to the bishopric of Agen, a town in which he resided for many years before his death in 1562. Bandello wrote a number of poems, but his fame rests entirely on his extensive collection of novellas, or tales, which have been extremely popular. They belong to the same genre as Boccaccio's Decameron and Marguerite de Navarre's Heptameron. The common origin of them all is to be found in the Old French fabliaux, though some well-known tales are evidently Eastern, and others classical. Bandello's novellas are thought the best of those written in imitation of the Decameron, though Italian critics find fault with them for negligence and inelegance of style. The stories on which William Shakespeare based several of his plays were supplied by Bandello, probably through Belleforest and Pierre Boaistuau, whose stories were later translated into English by William Paynter and included in his The Palace of Pleasure. Another of his stories includes The Countess of Celent, a distortion of Chaland, a northwest region of Italy. English translations of novellas. The only nearly complete translation of Bandello's tales into English is The Novels of Matteo Bandello, translated by John Payne in 6 volumes, 1890. This edition is separated into 4 parts, containing 51, 43, 51, and 21 stories, respectively, for a total of 166, minus 2, omitted because of their being almost identical to those of Marguerite de Navarre's Heptameron, respectively, though keeping Bandello's dedicatory preface. The Payne translation is a mixture of 19th and 16th century idioms. Examples of the latter include, and thou wilt, instead of, if you will, wenius, instead of, when, methinketh, instead of, I think, parlous, instead of, perilous. On most occasions, the language is clear and of fine literary value, but sometimes it is degraded with terms no one ever spoke or wrote. For example, instead of saying, "Now I would gladly hear your advice on this matter," the Duchess of Amalfi says, "Now I would fain hear from thee that which thou counsellest therein." There is a second book of Bandello in an English translation by Percy Pinkerton and containing 12 tales. This translation uses a more modern mode of expression. Source material. The vast majority of the stories derive from those Bandello heard from contemporaries, reported as real-life events. Far more rarely, some stories are based on literary or historical sources, such as Book 5 of Dante's Purgatory, the Lucretia and Tarquin episode in Livy's History of Rome, story number 23 of the Heptameron, and Francesco Petrarca's Triumph of Love. Some derive from English history, such as the Chronicle of Mary Douglas, niece to King Henry VIII of England and Henry VIII's 6 wives. Some from Spanish history, such as Alfonso X. All of them were told to him by men, but a minority of dedicatory prefaces are offered to women. Bandello writes that the dedicatory prefaces to the nobility or to worthy persons are useful to him as a shield in case someone becomes offended by one of the stories and is tempted to attack him. He shows psychological insight into jealousy, in particular the description of 2 types of jealous men, the first from feelings of inadequacy and the II from feelings of the fickleness of women. The most striking stories include two whores seeking to win the husband's back, two brother thieves in cahoots to rob the treasures of the king of Egypt, a disdained lover voluntarily choosing to live inside a cave, a woman killing herself only out of fear that her good fortune will turn bad. Filippo Lippi, released from slavery in Africa because of his talent as a celebrated painter, a woman disdaining a man and then killing herself when he no longer pursues her, an abbot making music from a chorus of pigs, an adulterous lover buried alive and then saved, a merchant's murder of another, a case of double adultery whereby each husband cuckolds the other, and two women yelling at each other after being falsely told they're hard of hearing. Plays by Shakespeare. 4 Bandello stories were adapted by Shakespeare, including Cymbeline, the Claudio subplot of Much Ado About Nothing, Romeo and Juliet, and Twelfth Night, plus one from the Shakespeare Apocrypha Edward III. Plays by others. Bandello stories have also been adapted by other dramatists, including John Webster, The Duchess of Malfi, Philip Massinger, The Picture, the same sources that of Cymbeline, John Marston and Jean Myritt, Sophonisba, John Fletcher, The Maid in the Inn, the anonymous 17th-century French author of The Cruel Moor, and Giuseppe Giacosa, La Signora di Chaland, The Lady of Chaland.